Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak today. It's an absolute privilege to be able to learn from so many other experts, as well as to be able to share our experience in Edinburgh. So we have 20 minutes or so in which to go very quickly through the challenges of attempting to manage a complex urban area. We've lost it. We're back. Good. Okay, so the World Heritage Site in Edinburgh takes around 2,400 hectares of the city centre, covering the entire historic centre, the medieval centre, and also the 18th and 19th century city centre. So you can see here the urban forms, two very clear juxtaposed urban forms of the medieval and of the rational 18th and 19th century. This takes in about 25,000 residents, all the institutions of state, as we are a capital city. It has the solicitors who have been there since 1300. It takes in the royal palaces. It takes in 25,000 residents who are very intelligent and very passionate about their city and express their love by complaining. It takes in about 6 million visitors a year as well. So the stage is perfectly set for conflicts. Lots and lots of conflicts. And of course, the role of the World Heritage Site Manager is to try and manage those conflicts. So I love everybody, but not everybody loves me. My organization is a non-governmental organization that supports the management of the World Heritage Site with the City of Edinburgh Council. We have tried to make World Heritage something positive. It is easy to use World Heritage to say, let's not do something. Instead, we want it to be a dynamic force that benefits people. Let's do some things because of World Heritage. And we want to do that by connecting people to their heritage. So we have 3 simple objectives. They are related to the World Heritage Convention directly. First, we safeguard and support the outstanding universal value. Secondly, we promote that understanding of OUV, linking directly to Article 27. And then we try and build capacity. We try and do things better. We try and learn how to better look after our World Heritage Site and support colleagues in looking after their World Heritage Sites. And we have 3 principal tools. Firstly, engagement, working with communities and others. Secondly, partnership. We're one organization. It's a big city. There are many other organizations we can work with. And thirdly, we have expertise. We have a very broad range of skills in our office. We have historians, we have political scientists, of course, we have 1 or 2 architects. We have people who have such a broad, rich experience that gets beyond the normal ideas of how you manage an object, because we're talking about different sets of values. The law in the UK forces us to think about architectural and historical values, but to us, a city is something else. So this diagram is one I drew. You can tell I drew it because it's badly drawn. But each dot is the front door of a house on a street, and each line represents the relationships within that area. And for us, this is about communal memory and communal identity. So heritage goes beyond the buildings. The buildings are the skeleton on which we build the heritage, on which we build the memories. And that takes us into a different set of values and a different way of managing. Because if you remove one of those dots, you are removing the social structure and you are removing communal identity as well. So this means we have to look at our city in a different way, at those different layers. And the principal tool in doing that is the historic urban landscape approach, which UNESCO has bravely promoted, stepping aside from the enormous academic world that has built up around World Heritage. So often that world is artificial because World Heritage is an artificial construct, but our values are not artificial, our values are real. So historic urban landscape is incredibly useful because it gets us, the experts, to talk to people and to understand why they think World Heritage is important. In fact, not even why World Heritage is important, why heritage is important, why their cities are important. And very often, it relates back to simple needs. They like it because they were born there, because their grandparents lived there. And historic urban landscape lets us translate those very human needs into the systems of protection. This is a diagram from one of the whole publications I will fly through as we have little time. So our governance structure in Edinburgh is a little complex in that responsibilities are shared between ourselves, the city, and the government. That requires a degree of partnership working and relationship building. The site manager has to build these relationships and has to get to know everybody. We don't have to like each other necessarily, but we do have to trust each other. And we build that trust using historic urban landscape approach through the small projects and through building those into larger projects over time, up to the scale of Anne Laura's work in Bordeaux, which is at a tremendous scale. Our management plan is a principal tool in this, and I want to dwell on this briefly because it demonstrates how we do that translation. So in creating the management plan, we stepped aside from our expertise and asked people what their views were about the World Heritage Site. And to do that, we used this tool here, which takes a range of issues around the edge and asks people to score them. And we then ask them deeper questions. Now, of course, the problem is in any community, there are some people who like to speak louder than others. We didn't want to talk to them. We wanted to talk to the other people. So to gather the opinions around this, we went out very wide and talked to a very broad range of people. We went out into the parks outside of the city centre and talked to people. We went along to festivals and events to talk to different groups of people to understand. And we got about 500 very in-depth responses and about 500 other responses, which allowed us to draw a deeper picture. So people scored. You can see the low scores there. On the outside, we could sum up the issues, and then beyond that, some of the solutions to those issues. So that came forward with a management plan which looks something like this with the key issues. The colors are not because I like colors. The colors are about who has some responsibility. So the orange starts to show where my organization can have some influence, and the yellow is where we share influence with the other partners. And talking about transparency, our plan is available on the internet. I could even try and show it to you now. Let's see if this works. It may not work. Let's go on to there. Ta-da! There it is. So we had the plan summarized very briefly, telling you through all the different sections. And we've kept our plan as simple as possible. Earlier, it was talked about how management plans have become more and more complex. Well, we decided to make ours as simple as possible, down to the point where we look at the action plan and we have those issues summarized there and we can go into more depth on them. So this is a simple presentation of, yes, they are complex issues, but let's put them in a language that normal, everyday people understand. Otherwise, there is a disconnect. And World Heritage becomes a matter for the elite. One moment, we'll be there. Good. So, putting the plan into action. This is the interesting and exciting part because we can have the perfect plan, but we have a small problem called people. People are incredibly challenging, and they're also wonderful and make things happen, and we do all of this because the city has people. So I'm going to look at some examples under each of these project areas, those overall ideas. Now, we prioritize our very limited funding. And in terms of conservation, that is put into historic tenements, apartment blocks, and into shop fronts, and into some public spaces. The tenements are exciting and important because in a block, if one person refuses to repair, nothing happens. So this requires very intense person-to-person work, deep community engagement. With the examples here, we started at the far end with one block of 10 owners. They came to us and we built the project with them and supported the project. Their neighbors then said, what about us? Great, so we could build the project with them too. And we are currently building the project with the third building in a row along this block. And this is dealing with simple issues around external fabric repair. The repairs are very light touch, but we make sure the project belongs to the residents. It is not our project. To date, we've completed 1,500 projects with residents. That's a long-term effort. And of course, World Heritage requests those long-term horizons. This is one of the more spectacular buildings we've supported the repair of. which had 55 owners. My colleague Fiona went in and talked to 55 owners, convinced them to spend £2.1 million on repairing this building. It's a huge project. And quite wonderful as well. We put it forward for a Europa Nostra prize, but the jury turned it down because they couldn't tell the difference from before and after the repair. That is how we conserve things. We do it gently, we do it carefully. The key result, though, was 55 different owners talking to each other, which they weren't before. We want to work on shop fronts. These are really challenging and difficult because the businesses often have very little spare money. There's difficult relationships with their owners, between the shopkeeper and the building owner. And of course, the excitement here is that this is what you see at eye level. Most people don't look up. We know this. It's a real problem in our historic cities. So what they perceive is the street furniture and the shop fronts. If we can get the shop fronts right, we're part of the way there to engaging people more strongly with their heritage. And then in terms of challenges, climate challenges are enormous. And at the moment, we're trying a project using our skills around historic apartment blocks to combine at the design stage energy efficiency and conservation. And we have some funding for this, but it is very expensive. To meet the targets of Scottish Government in reducing CO2 emissions, we must make sure this approach is rolled out more widely, but the cost is enormous. So our aim here is to take away the learnings about replicability and how this can be used in other examples and how we can find other sources of funding. For those public spaces I mentioned, our priority is to look at how we can change perceptions of public space. And in this case, we have 100 or so alleyways in the city. In these alleyways, we have chosen 12 which have problems around crime, and we're looking at how engaging with the community to understand the heritage can then be interpreted through art into lighting that changes ideas. And by doing it with the community, we can ensure the projects have a longer life on the ground. Again, I'm having to move fast, so I apologize. I can talk to you all separately later about any individual project. Interpretation, that second area of our work, is critical. And we've made an enormous investment and experiment with this ruined church on the Royal Mile, which for 50 years had been vacant. We have put into it some temporary interpretation to experiment and understand how to tell the stories of the World Heritage Site. And we are doing that by telling the stories through the eyes of the people who live and work in the city. Not us experts giving an architectural explanation, but by asking the residents to tell their stories. This has been successful, and we have had around 300,000 visitors through the building since it opened in July this year. We will continue to experiment for 3 or 4 years to build the case for investment. The building needs between £5 and £10 million of investment. At the moment, it has a shop unit in there which pays for the temporary running costs. So it is a public-private partnership at present. In terms of engaging the millennials and others, we use social media a great deal, which is hugely effective. I won't dwell on this too much, but we have integrated communications and interpretation together rather than having separate disciplines. And we can tell short stories around the city's heritage and around people's relationships to it, which get great engagement. But of course, we still do a lot of formal education work with schools and others. How many minutes do I have? 5 minutes. We can do this. Of course, education covers our politicians as well. We all love our politicians deeply, and occasionally we have to give them a big hug. So we do this by holding what we call hustings. Before the last election, we sent to each party group our manifesto for the World Heritage Site. There were some very broad statements, they couldn't disagree, and we then invited representatives from each group to a public meeting. We thought we might get 30 or 40 residents come along. We had 300 residents come along, and we had 2 hours of heated and exciting debate, the result of which was that every party accepted the importance of our World Heritage Site, and there's been a fundamental change in the attitudes of the political class in Edinburgh in the last 2 years to our World Heritage. Before it was seen as a blockage, now they see its advantages, which is wonderful. We also want to share our experience as well. We want to learn from other places about how we do things better, and we want to be able to take some of our skills out to the wider world to try and meet those wider objectives. So working with European funding, and we will continue to work with European funding for as long as our politicians allow us, we have worked on intangible heritage, on the skills needed, for example, through a small project here with a number of different countries producing videos about the disappearing skills. We've worked on looking at urban time maps to support interpretation and bringing together 3D imaging as well. And we have a wonderful project with Florence and with Bordeaux looking at the deeper issues our cities face and how we can face these challenges together. We've also taken steps to take advantage of Brexit. Britain is aware of the challenges it's going to face in the world and is starting to put money into cultural diplomacy. And we have accessed this funding to support our colleagues in southeast Turkey, down on the border with Syria, where cities have lost a lot of income from tourism and from government as well, and their heritage is in danger. So we've been focused on working in Mardin, looking at community engagement, energy efficiency, buildings in danger and how you prioritize those, and safety in urban areas. Mardin is a very attractive place, but it has very real problems. We've taken on also the restoration of one building there to work with the locals to increase their capacity around restoration. And the building project is looking like this at the moment. It's partly built into the hill. It's a very much a vernacular building which they've fallen out of favor. Residents have moved down into a new town away from the city center because these buildings were not fit for human habitation. So we're showing how you can sensitively adapt them to modern life using the knowledge we've picked up in Edinburgh and applying it. Not everything in Edinburgh is perfect. We do have enormous challenges facing us, as everywhere else does, around Airbnb, for example. So on the right-hand side, we have a diagram illustrating the growth in short-term lets in the city and the impact this is having on the social structures in the old town of Edinburgh is terrible. It really is. And I have one more image as well, which is about the nature of physical development. Will our colleague from UNESCO please close her eyes for a moment? So this, we have a situation where permission has been granted for the big golden thing at the end of the street. This big golden hotel is going to be a slight brown color, and so you can imagine the nickname that the locals have given it. It is not great. But what has happened is that a proposal has come along for a new concert hall built with funds given by an anonymous donor, by a donor, to be put in between the hotel and this view. So if this is the golden hotel going in there, the concert hall fills in the space behind it and mediates between the two. We had to make a judgment about impact on outstanding universal value. And when it comes to something which is purely cultural, this is challenging, it really is. But our overall conclusion was that in comparison to what was going in with the new hotel, the concert hall would have a neutral impact because it has the intangible cultural benefits, and its physical impact is in some ways negative, in some ways positive. It gives a clear backdrop to the 18th century house in front. It builds on the classical architecture of the square, but it is a large building which does have impact, but it also has this remarkable cultural benefit as well. So we all know these issues are never cut and dried, they're never black and white. The life of a World Heritage Site Manager, as I said, is to be disliked by people and not necessarily hated, but not necessarily loved. The developer of the hotel phoned me up and told me I was an appalling person for judging this to have a neutral impact, but that is my professional view. Anybody here who's a site manager, you have my sympathy. Anybody who wants to be one, good luck. Thank you very much.